The C-SPAN networks bring you long-form public affairs programming from the nation's capital and are a public service of your television provider. C-SPAN, created by cable.
This week on Q&A, former Ohio Republican Congressman Bob Ney discusses his newly released memoir titled Sideswiped, Lessons Learned Courtesy of the Hitmen of Capitol Hill.
Former Congressman Bob Ney, in a chapter headlined Pretty Alice, you call Pretty Alice the most covert, manipulative, cunning, stealth, vicious, cold-hearted instrument of evil that Karl Rove and the Bush administration had. What are you referring to? Who is Pretty Alice?
Well, I must have left out a couple of things, I guess, Brian, in that too. Alice Fisher. And Alice Fisher is a very interesting person that received some attention from Senator Levin in particular, and then that basically kind of went away, as I explained in the book. But Alice Fisher had really never particularly tried cases and was criticized for that. She was in the criminal division, I think it was 2001 to 2003. Went over to work for Chertoff. She was basically, by the White House, directly placed here and there as they needed her. An extreme political operative in a business where there's politics, but the Bush-Cheney re-election campaigns, et cetera. She was I don't want to say political hack, although I've been unkind to her in the book, but I'll say political hack. And she then was up for appointment when Alberto Gonzales was the Attorney General of the United States. Now, it ran afoul of Senator Levin. And the reason it did is because he said, A, she was close to Tom DeLay's defense team. She'd had some dealings with his defense team. B, she didn't have a lot of experience trying cases, was going to be head of the criminal division. But the most important part where she was so stealth on this, and that's where I bring in the whole Cheney torture, Guantanamo Bay, Alberto Gonzales flair to this thing, is that she was approached when she was in the criminal division of the Justice Department by the FBI. And this is, available through Wikipedia, et cetera. It's not something I created. And she was part of saying, torture, just let's suppress that. She was part of that whole cover-up. So she was not just a person that was an attorney. She was in the power position to be able to say, no, torture, we'll let that be suppressed a bit.
So you plea bargained, and what was the plea bargain to her?
Well, she was head of the criminal division, and she made all the announcements. Now, I call her Pretty Alice for a personal reason, as I state in the book. When we would be sitting there and we would see press conferences, I'd be with my attorneys, she would put on, this red dress, and she would be quite dolled up and smiling before the cameras, and I would look up and say, there's Pretty Alice. So it became an inside joke with my attorneys and I incorporated that into the chapter of Pretty Alice. But the reason it was important for her, which I didn't connect all of these dots, frankly, until later, during my prison time and afterwards, of the exact integral part of Alice, John Boehner, at that time Majority Leader, Barry Jackson, who was his chief of staff that worked for Karl Rove whenever the White House, and then my former chief of staff, Dave DeStefano. I didn't put all those pieces together, but what ended up happening was she was being criticized by Senator Levin, not enough trial experience, too close to Tom DeLay's defense team. Tom DeLay was close to Jack Abramoff. He was under scrutiny, supposedly by the Justice Department, which, faded away. And the other part to it was that she had been part of this cover-up of torture. Now, her appointment was basically in trouble, as everybody knew, from Senator Levin going to the floor of the Senate. At some point in time, when John Boehner in August called me and cut a deal with me, Majority Leader at that point in time, and he said I had 24 hours to consider this deal or it would be irrelevant, that, in fact, I would be able to get a job comparable to the salary I made in Congress, and he would help me raise legal defense money to, quote, put this behind me, this whole problem I had with the Justice Department, if, in fact, I pulled out of the election. Didn't have to resign from Congress, but I needed to say publicly, I'm not running. They then would get a replacement, which Congressman Boehner named Senator Joey Padgett from Ohio.
What year was this?
This would have been 2006 in August. I had 24 hours, and I clearly remember John Boehner saying, if you don't accept this deal in 24 hours, it's off the table. We won't have this deal again. I called within 24 hours after a lot of soul searching, and I said, fine, I'll take the deal. Comparable salary, you find me a job, and then you help me raise legal defense money. to fight this thing and put it behind me. I just won the primary in 2006. I was full steam ahead to run. Boehner's call made the significant difference of me getting out just in time so they could find somebody to run in my place. Now, after that, and I announced and I officially sent my letter to the Secretary of State of Ohio, I couldn't get a janitor in John Boehner's office to call me back. It all evaporated. Soon after that, into the September or so time frame, my lawyers had contact from the Justice Department. It was full steam ahead. Indictments, multiple indictments, or plea, take your pick. At that point in time, I made a decision to take a plea. By September the 13th or so, Alice Fisher solved her lack of prosecution on the Abramoff case, and that was me. All of a sudden, the plea was let out. They had a plea in process. Alice Fisher goes on to her appointment process. And that's where, if you read the book, I believe the dots connect.
Here is the woman you refer to as Pretty Alice.
Pretty Alice.
International and domestic trips, such as a trip to Scotland with others valued at $160,000, a trip to New Orleans valued at $7,000, a trip to Lake George valued at $3,500, and thousands of dollars of meals, drinks, tickets to concerts, tickets to sporting events, and use of a box suite to conduct fundraisers. In exchange for this stream of benefits, as Congressman Ney admits, he agreed to perform a series of official acts, including agreeing to insert 4 separate and unrelated amendments to election reform legislation, statements into the congressional record, and agreeing to support Jack Abramoff's clients in obtaining a multi-million-dollar contract. And then he concealed these actions from the public and from the House of Representatives by filing inaccurate disclosure statements.
Anything she said it was wrong?
Yes, and this is very fascinating. First of all, let me make it crystal clear. I committed illegal acts, unethical acts, improper acts. I took free food from Jack Abramoff. I took free booze from Jack Abramoff. So I don't deny any of that. I created this problem for myself, and I admit that right out front. However, she mentions a Lake George trip. Now, I was not, indicted or asked for a plea on that trip. That Lake George trip, I paid on that Lake George trip. The people that went on that trip know that. The people that they downloaded, some of my former staff, they know that too. That trip was the basic bulk of it. That was a personal trip. 4 friends took it, and I paid my way on that trip. As far as the thousands of dollars, which the Justice Department estimates $6,000 of my staff and I at Jack Abramoff's restaurant, my staff and I, that we partook in food and alcohol, that's true. And they estimate about $6,000. I don't disagree with that. Over a period of, I think it was 3 years. On that, that's accurate. Now, what she fails to mention is when I would go to Jack Abramoff's restaurant Signatures, I would have to shove the Bush White House staffers aside to get a drink at the bar. They were getting free drinks too, which is fine. I'm my own problem on this. But when she mentions, kind of highlights it, amendments. This is the one that really gets me, though. Inserting amendments into the Help America Vote Act. I inserted no amendment for Jack Abramoff into the Help America Vote Act, which was my legacy bill with Steny Hoyer. The first official election bill dealing with the federal government in probably the nation's history. It was a legacy bill, an important bill. I did not insert Jack's amendments. I was on a conference committee with Senator McConnell, Senator Dodd. Any of those gentlemen will verify. At no point in time did we lay an amendment on the table. At no point in time did I say, here's an amendment for Jack Abramoff. Simply didn't happen. Now, did I agree to consider an amendment for Jack Abramoff for that bill? Yes, absolutely. I am probably one of the first members of Congress in this country's history in modern times to plead a felony for agreeing to consider an amendment to a bill. If they would go to the Hill today and charge felonies on people that are considering amendments to the bill, there would be barely anybody left on Capitol Hill.
When did you know that you were doing something wrong?
Well, there were bright lines I crossed. For example, when Jack Abramoff came into my office and said, I have an amendment for the Help America Vote Act, he said that members of the Senate were interested in this, members of the Senate were on board. I, as a member of the House, said very clearly to Jack Abramoff that I would consider this amendment, which is my felony, I guess, for the considering of an amendment. I would consider this amendment. The other thing is that if the Senate wanted this amendment, of course, I need that bill. And if senators want that amendment and it doesn't ruin my bill, I told Abramoff, I'll consider it. Now, at that point in time, though, I didn't know what was in the amendment. We didn't have an actual amendment. And that in itself is a problem. To just generically consider something that a lobbyist wants, whether it's Abramoff or not, and to say, yes, I'll consider that, then I think that's a problem in itself. But the bright line is when we received, a member of my staff received an email, and it said, if you want to go to Jack's restaurant and if you want to eat and you want to drink, meaning myself in the office, although staffers went, I'll take the responsibility. I could have said, no, none of us are going. Then, it's going to be taken care of. Whether it was by Jack or my former staffer that worked for Jack or whoever, what other lobbyist. That was a crossing, Brian, of the bright line. The other one was the Scotland trip. And as I note in the book, I came back, I turned to two staffers, I said, that was weird. At that point in time, I should have written a check because I knew that did not smell right. So there were bright lines I crossed. When did I know? I operated like DC operates in some ways, but there were definite signs, probably within a 6-month period of meeting Jack Abramoff, that I should have said, doesn't look good.
How long did you spend in Congress?
I was part of the Contract with America class, so I came in 1995, of course, in January, and I resigned November of 2006.
How long did you spend in prison?
I was in prison 17 months. Now, I was behind the wall, as we would say, for a year's period and then into the halfway house. So I did 17 months officially of federal time. I was sentenced to 30 months. My plea deal, I think, was 18 months.
When you think back on prison, and I know you do a whole chapter on prison and your halfway house, what comes to mind first?
First is people that are warehoused. It's a warehouse. Anybody that thinks it's rehabilitation, anybody that thinks it's anything of trying to get people prepared to go back in society, it's a warehouse. So the first thing that comes to my mind is the word warehouse.
What was it like getting there the first day? Who was with you? What were the first couple of days like?
I did something I didn't want to do. My friend Ellen Ratner, who is now my current boss at Talk Radio News Service, said you must come to D.C. and you have to sit with Webb Hubbell. I remember Webb Hubbell when he walked into our hearing room. Mike Oxley was chairman, I believe, or maybe Mr. Leach of the Financial Services Committee. We were looking at Whitewater and the president, and we had Webb Hubbell brought out of prison. I remember seeing Webb sitting in a suit in the anteroom off the House Financial Services Committee. That's how I met Webb Hubbell the first time. They took him back to Cumberland, Maryland prison. Later on in my life, I'm here in Washington, D.C., spent maybe 4 hours with Webb. He prepared me for what was going to happen. He was a former Assistant Attorney General of the United States, former Chief Justice of the Arkansas Supreme Court, and he said, this is what's going to happen. So that was the preparation. When I went to prison, I didn't take my family with me. It was traumatic and emotional as it was. I took two of my, one current staffer and one who had quit and went on to a operations media firm. Those two staffers went with me, actually, and then they dropped me off at prison. And I went in. I walked into the little kiosk. I said, I'm Bob Ney here to report. Guard came up as we walked down. He said, oh, I knew one of your campaign managers in Ohio. I said, okay. Got down in there. The guard said, here, you have some hate mail. It was from California, I remember, in Massachusetts. You have some hate mail waiting on you. They gave me the mail. You go through this, the most embarrassing part of the strip down. And then I got into the intake, walked into prison, down into the courtyard. The warden, I won't use the language I do in the book, but the warden told the man that's supposed to take me around, get away from him. He can find his own way, and I'm sitting there not knowing where to go, where I'm staying, what clothes to get during these newbie clothes, they call them, like pajama pants. And another prisoner said, where's your escort that's supposed to take you around? I said, I don't know. Some little guy in a suit yelled some foul language. He took me in the back way of the laundry room. I walk in, and a man is sitting there, and he said, are you the congressman? I said, used to be. He said, are you a Republican, aren't you? And I said, well, Republicans put me in here, you know. I have to pull up some humor at the situation. He said, well, I was the mayor of East Cleveland. Welcome, I'll get you some clothes.
And he was A prisoner.
He was a prisoner. I think he's just been recently released. He was a prisoner. He got me clothes. He said, "Where's your unit?" I said, "I don't know." He said, "Well, where's your escort?" I said, "Some little guy." Yelled all kinds of foul things, and the guy ran away. At the end of the day, I found out the next day that was the warden who was standing behind me screaming, "Let him find his own way," you know, to teach me a lesson. I walked towards the main line to eat the next day, and, you know, my mind's racing. How am I going to, when I get out of here, get a job? I've lost every dime I ever owned. What about my children? What about my family? You know, what can I do? You're disgraced, you know, you're full of shame, etc. And a prisoner turned to me and he said, "You co-authored the Sudafed law. You put me in here." And I realized it's a day at a time. I've got to get through this place. Forget the house, forget the job. I've got to get through this place. And I sat down and it, from that day, changed my attitude. So that was my first 24 hours.
What prison was it?
Morgantown Federal Corrections.
What's it close to?
It's Morgantown, West Virginia, between Wheeling, West Virginia, and Cumberland, Maryland.
You were born in Wheeling.
I was born in Wheeling, West Virginia, raised in Ohio, went to prison in Morgantown, West Virginia, and I'm going to make a choice to be buried in Ohio. I'm not going to be buried in West Virginia.
You say you work for Ellen Ratner.
Yes.
This audience knows Ellen Ratner from her appearances here. Before we talk about her, because she's mentioned throughout your whole book, I want to run a clip. This is just her appearance on this network, about the same time that this was all happening to you. It has nothing to do with you, but they can see what she looks like.
Well, I was a big marcher in the 60s, right over here on this mall. Many marches. The last big one, I was, well, not the last march I participated in, but the biggest one was in 1969, November of 1969, against the war. You know, all those LBJ and hey, what do you say? You know, all the, I'm not even repeat what we used to say, but I've been a big dissenter my whole life.
Ellen Ratner, in my recollection, could not be any farther away from you politically.
In the day in Congress, in those days, there was zero that Ellen Ratner and I agreed upon. Zero, politically. Today we might agree on some things, but still today I call Ellen lovingly the queen of the left. And Ellen is a pure, true liberal in all the sense of being a liberal. We've been friends since I walked into the doors of Congress, and but politically, we're a little closer here and there today, but in the congressional days, there's probably not one vote we would share.
What did she do for you?
Ellen did several things. We not only became friends, we had this karmic, I call it a karmic relationship, in the sense she changed her birthday party, her big 50th. And as a result, I didn't want to go to a scheduled event I had in New York City where I was to open NASDAQ, go into the tower, and then some kind of fundraiser and close the stock exchange. And I had it set, our office had set it for September the 11th of 2001. And I saw Ellen changed her birthday party. So they said, well, we think we can make it September the 4th. So 1 week earlier, I'm up in the tower looking out over the crisp day in New York. That was a karmic, cosmic bind with Ellen and I. I would have been in the towers that day had she not changed her birthday party. So there was something about Ellen Ratner beyond just a friend. And she visited me in prison, and she said, "You need to come work for Talk Radio News and do radio." I said, "Ellen, I don't want publicly to do anything. I just want to work a job. That's all I want to do." She said, no, you need to get you back in the saddle. You have things to offer. So what Ellen did for me, and I mention this as I dedicate the book to her, not only, I work for her now, but that's the small part. But Ellen was my friend, counselor, psychiatrist, tough love. Yeah, Ellen, as you know, Ellen Ratner, she doesn't let you get by with anything. She'll tell you right now in an unfiltered tone, and I mean that with all flattery. So Ellen just has been a wonderful, wonderful friend.
Where do you live now?
Ohio, Newark, Ohio, near Columbus, Ohio, which used to share Licking County with John Kasich at one time, our now governor, and then after that, the current Congressman, Pat Tiberi.
Married twice, divorced twice. Current relationships?
No, not really.
Kids?
Oh, 2 children, yeah. Nothing serious, though, but 2 children. And a grandchild. I have to mention my grandchild.
Go back to the prison. I mean, the thought of public officials being in prison and the experience is rarely written about. You've put it all here on paper. What was it like that first couple of days, and what kind of a cell were you in? Because you mentioned here that there's a toilet in the cell with you, and did that serve the people in the
no,
cell?
actually, that's the toilet is if you are put into solitary confinement, because I mentioned the SHU, S-H-U, solitary confinement unit. And I mention that because if you get in trouble, that's where you are placed with another person, so it's not a very good place to be.
Did you ever get in trouble?
No. Well, I did. I did get in trouble once because I went to do some laundry, and the one officer said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, laundry." It's hard to explain, but the TVs were turned on, which meant you could get up and move around. Well, here they had not turned the TVs off, so we thought we could get up and move around. And I said, "Well, I'm sorry, and I can't repeat on TV what he said to me. You better be sorry, and I know who you are, Congressman, and blah, blah, blah." But I never got cited for it, so otherwise I didn't get in trouble. But as far as what the prison was like, it was traumatic at that time. My family, I was married, my second wife, my children, and you're going into prison, so you walk in there and everything you've ever known is behind you. I always tell my friends, I went from Capitol Hill where, "Hello, Mr. Chairman. Hi, Mr. Chairman. Would you like a drink, Mr. Chairman? Here, have a cup of coffee, Mr. Chairman," to, "No, you're not getting a second round of oatmeal, scumbag, move on." So it's a little bit of a different attitude in prison. But when I went in, I immediately, met some people, and I've got to be frank about this. I became friends more with the people who were in there for drug offenses than the white-collar crime people. I had white-collar crime friends. I became more friends with the people who were in for drug offenses. First of all, they didn't whine as much about prison. They were more street savvy, and they were people who had, I think, for me at least, a lot to share. They came from they never would have had a chance to meet a member of Congress. They would never, and a lot of them told me that, and a lot of minorities, African Americans, Latinos, said, "We would never have had an opportunity to meet you when you were in Congress. We'd love to ask you questions." And I would answer questions in some of the classrooms and talk to them about jobs and resumes. So, I received a lot back from them. But the first initial part is terrifying for anyone, especially myself, because I went from a lawmaker to a lawbreaker. And some people in prison said, "You made the laws that put me in here. You did that to me." And then, of course, you try to say, "Well, you broke the law, but yes, I created the law." So it made a little bit of a difference.
Was it a country club security?
Ricky Campbell, and I have permission to use his name, he has written 2 pages, I believe, in this book. Ricky Campbell was a prisoner. Something very fascinating he has to say, very accurate. He was in longer than I was and kept better notes. As Ricky addresses the Club Fed thing, Barbara Walters at one point in time did a Club Fed interview about, swimming pools and how these are Club Feds. Well, this was a minimum, so it wasn't a camp.
There are no bars on the
That's correct. There's no bars.
No cell.
You have a door, no cells, open cubicles, things like that. They don't even lock you in at night. There's officers, but you could get up if to go to the restroom or something, but there are no particular cells. Unless you get in trouble, then you go into the SHU, the holding area. But as far as the Club Fed attitude, it's not. It's prison. It's punishment. You will do this at a certain time. You will do that at a certain time. You will follow the rules. You run out of minutes and you have an emergency at home, too bad. If someone dies, you hear "nay" to the chapel. When you hear that, you know someone has died. You go to the chapel. Oh, and I know this is a particular case from 2 friends. "Oh, your mother died. By the way, you owe us $22 on your account." That's about how you're told. Now, I know I did wrong, and there were people in prison that did wrong, but there's a certain human quality. If you want to psychologically rebuild someone who has committed a crime, that you would undertake these in a different way. So prison is no joyride. I don't care if it's county lockup, state, or federal. But the Club Fed, years ago when they did that whole Club Fed thing, it gave a country club attitude to the place. Yes, there are maximum security places I wouldn't want to be, where there are hardcore people. That maybe committed murder, such types of crimes. But the minimums are no picnic ride where you're just free to talk to your family, pick up the phone, and do what you want to do.
Who was Charles Mosier?
Charles Mosier was my probation officer, and he's federal. He was assigned to me in Columbus, Ohio. Had an interesting situation because he was, whether intentionally or whatever, he was in fact calling to the prison. And the prison then, the gentleman in the prison that oversaw that part of the probation and when you leave would call me in, and he just would scare me to death. You know, what do you having this man call for? What are you trying to do? You think you're something, Congressman? You're trying to use pool? And I would say, I don't know Charles Mosher. I've never heard of the man. He went out of line because the gentleman in prison told me, he said, I'm going to take care of this. I'm going to call his boss. Well, I didn't care what he did. You know, I'd call Mr. Mosher's boss. But the calls in created me a massive heartburn. And as I also show in the book, they called me in to ask me who I was working for, which was going to be Ellen Ratner, how much money I was going to make, which I didn't even know at that time. I was just happy to have a job. And all these details that you normally aren't put through, all prior to me getting out of prison. And I was not released from prison on the due date I was to be released. And I outlined in the book how I fortunately, by accident, was able to get a private call to my attorney.
How much of this book did you write yourself? I
have written the entire book myself, except for Ricky Campbell's part of the prison and Matt Parker, a former staffer of mine, that put together I would call it a chapter in the book. Now, I had an editor, Sherry Johnson from New Mexico, wonderful woman who was part my conscience to say this is what I think. I could make the final call on it, and also she would fluff up some of my writing style. But the actual book itself, as far as the thoughts of the book, you know, I have written them. I didn't have a ghostwriter who gave me the material, but I wrote them myself. And then Sherry, as editor, would help me with.
Where did you write it?
I wrote the book in India.
Where in India?
In Goa. At the beach in India, it's called Goa, Indian Ocean, and also in Dharamsala, India, specifically McLeod Ganj, which is the city above Dharamsala. I was 5 minutes from the Dalai Lama's residence. I wrote the book in Goa, and I wrote it basically in 60 days between Goa and Dharamsala, India.
How did you write it? Longhand, or did you dictate it? Or?
No, actually, I ended up, I had one of those, I don't know what you call it, you speak into this mic, and I abandoned that within 2 days. So I actually would sit down on Word, on the computer, go to either down by the ocean and would go to the tea shops, and I would type it up, and I would send it to Sherry, and we would just start, after my outline I put together, we would just start chapter by chapter. I returned then to Newark, Ohio, and did editing from my return, which would have been around May 31st. I returned and did editing all the way up to January, to when we pushed the send button and produced the bill.
Changing Lives Press.
The book, I said the bill.
Yeah. Changing Lives Press in Cleveland. Who do they publish? Why do they publish?
That's Ellen Ratner. Ellen opened her own publishing company. She decided when she wanted to publish books, she has published, I think, 4 or 5 books, that she would be able to do it herself. And right now they have Muriel Hemingway. They have published a book by Sherry Johnson, who is my editor, has published a book about her daughter, Sholene, who is Ellen's partner. And myself, I think they have maybe 2 other people. So it's a new publishing company.
There's another media person in here besides Ellen Ratner that you write about, John Bresnahan.
Mm-hmm. From Politico now.
You don't care a whole lot for John Bresnahan. Tell us why.
Well, with Bresnahan, at that time, he had sent me, or had sent to my press secretary, Brian Walsh, an email. Brian brought the email in, and it clearly said in there some bad language of what he was going to do to Mr. Ney. And when I said to Brian, I said, I want that email, because I wanted it. And Brian it was one of those emails you really just don't want to have, you know, into the hands of other people. But Brian gave me the email. And I had been told by some of Abramoff's people that John Bresnahan was getting information from Jack Abramoff for stories as this whole thing was going down, because Jack was quite secluded from the press, as you can imagine, after the Washington Post and the New York Times and everybody else under the sun was going after him. And Bresnahan was doing stories, but at that point in time, I was told also point blank by Jack Abramoff's people that Jack was angry at me. I had used the word that he duped me, and that Tom DeLay was still standing up for him, and as a result, Bresnahan was, you know, helping to do some stories that would cause me heartburn, because Jack was feeding him items of, you know, what we did, where we went, etc. So that was one. Second is the fact that the whistleblower that really started this, not Emily Miller. Everybody says Emily Miller started all this. She didn't. The whistleblower was Tom Rogers. He's a Native American. He's been involved with Native American issues. He's the first one that uncovered, rightfully so, the dealings with Jack Abramoff and myself with Jack and the Indian tribes. Tom Rogers confronted Jack Abramoff not too long ago at the press club within the last year and said, were you your people in cash games with reporters, card games, high-stake card games with reporters, members of Congress, but mostly staff, lobbyists? And Jack said, I can't recall. And at that point in time, I had played cards with Brezhnev. I had paid Brezhnev money towards my last year that I was in trouble, and I knew they had some card games going. I felt that was important to reveal in the process. I don't think that should occur. And I felt that Brezhnev had his cake and eat it too, in the way he would carry out stories on people, but yet he himself, as a reporter, was making terrible violations of the rules and the ethics and even the smell of the ethics involved with staffers and lobbyists in these card games. The other thing is that there was an arrangement of Jack Abramoff, and I misquoted, I said roll call, to buy the Hill magazine, and Brezhnev would become the editor. Jack had this marvelous plan where he could control media and stories that were written maybe against other lobbyists that he was dealing with.
What kind of worry did you have? I mean, you accused John Brezhnev of taking money, but you say in the book, that you let him win the card games.
I don't say that Brezhnev knew that. I'm sitting there. I'm in trouble. I'm scrambling for my life. I'm sitting there with the right or the wrong of it in a card game with a reporter. And I have a pretty good hand, and I'm going to fold that hand. I'm going to lose $268 some. That's my intention. I'm not saying that Brezhnev said do that. I'm not saying he knew I did that, but I did it.
So what has he done wrong then?
Well, I don't think as a reporter you should be in cash games with members of Congress or cash games with lobbyists. How many lobbyists are folding hands to make someone happy? Maybe they did it with me.
I wrote down, talk about the money whores in D.C. Who are the money whores?
Well, I think the system itself, and I come to this conclusion, but I think the system itself is dysfunctional. John McCain was going to clean up this system. We were going to not have money as we know it in the system. It's proliferated into a nuclear war of campaign funds. That bill, McCain Feingold campaign finance reform, did zero, created loopholes, the 527s. You've got the George Soroses to the left, the Karl Roves and the Kochs to the right. So I believe a lot of it is the race for money. Now, I'm asked constantly on radio shows today about members of Congress, are they good or bad? Plenty of good members of Congress, both sides of the aisle. And there's some people that, we know since I've got in trouble, have gotten in trouble for unethical activities. But the system itself is doomed to corruption. Anything Jack Abramoff and I did, I ate sushi with Jack Abramoff, I drank some booze with Jack Abramoff, I went to Scotland with Jack Abramoff. Anything that Jack Abramoff and I did is now codified in the United States law. If I am a lobbyist, and Brian, you're a congressman today, I give true examples in the book that have happened. And I put these examples in the book sometimes with names omitted for a reason, because I can produce names. But if I want to, I can take you to Alaska. We can hunt. We can have a $3,000 to $4,000 dinner, way over what, better food than Jack had too, Jack Abramoff had. We can do that. And I can raise you $75,000. I can then take you, a staffer, maybe some of your family, fly you as a congressman to Las Vegas. We can have a $2,000 or $3,000 dinner. I can raise you $125,000. It's all legal. As long as we stand up at a reception and eat, we're legal. I can have meals. I can still use loges. Alice Fisher, in her announcement, that's the other thing I didn't mention, she said, well, the congressman used loges for fundraisers. No kidding. Everybody listening to this program, and everybody on that hill today, I was charged. I pled guilty for, I did a lot of wrong things, but for using a loge for a fundraiser? Give me a break. The entire Congress would be in Morgantown.
What do you mean by a loge?
A loge is a private box. And you go to them, you watch the game, and you have a fundraiser. It's done today. Nothing's changed on that, whatever I was charged for. So those are the types of things where they say, well, he used the private lounge. It's done constantly for fundraisers.
Here's some video. Tom Rogers, you mentioned. I want to take a look at him, and then you can tell us what role he played.
My world is very small. There's not too many Native Americans in the country, for a reason. And then also, what happened was I had people who trusted me, who came to me. And they came to me in the year 2002. I walked into the bar, and I looked for somebody who looked like they were looking for somebody. And up walks this young gentleman, Ernest Sickey, former chairman of the Cashadas. He says, Tom, Rogers, this is Ernest. I says, well, tell me your story, Ernest. And you can imagine, I wasn't surprised. And he says, Tom, we are paying tens of millions of dollars to a lobbyist. I said, Jack Abramoff? He said, yes. And I don't know what we're getting for it. And that was a constant narrative.
How did he play such a significant role then?
If you look at, there's two movies, Alex Gibney, Casino, Jack in the United States of Money, a wonderful documentary.
And you cooperated.
I was in there. Tom Rogers was in there. Neil Volz, my former chief of staff, who has a book, Into the Sun. And then there's the movie by Kevin Spacey. Jeff Pustil plays me, and Kevin Spacey plays Jack Abramoff. And I like Spacey. He's one of my favorite actors. But that's, the Hollywood movie. In that movie, it shows Emily Miller, who was, quote, scorned by Michael Scanlon, and she started all this. That's not accurate.
Who was Scanlon?
Scanlon was the business partner of Jack Abramoff. And he's currently in
But he had worked for Tom DeLay.
He worked for Tom DeLay. He was the connection. Abramoff was close to DeLay, et cetera, and then through Mike Scanlon. Well, Emily Miller didn't start all of this. That was a Hollywood version and a misnomer out there in the media. Tom Rogers started all of this, and I praise him for starting all of this. If I had anger in me, I would say, that guy did this to me. He didn't. He simply stood up on behalf of Native Americans. He found out that something was going on that just didn't look right, didn't smell right. And anybody can represent clients, but when you get to a certain level and then you use members of Congress to verify that this is a great lobbyist, you ought to keep hiring him. And the Native Americans, unfortunately, aren't getting that much of a return on it, then it's not a healthy situation. Tom Rogers simply told the truth when he found it out, and I give Tom Rogers credit. He's the man that got this ball rolling.
Foxconn. What's that story?
Foxconn was one of the more interesting aspects. The federal government wanted to indict me for Foxconn so bad that Pretty Alice she was salivating to do this one. But at the end of the day, Foxconn was one of the weird contracts that the actual providers were the ones who decided, and I'll explain that. Members of Congress, their time is extremely valuable, and when they go to vote, they usually go either underground or above ground. When you go underground, the cell phones literally would not work. Chairman Bill Thomas of California, was chairman of the House Administration Committee. There was a contract to wire under the Capitol, on the House side, these devices that would repeat signals, so members of Congress could use their cell phones as the bottom line. There were two companies, LGC and Foxconn. Two members of Congress were supporting each company. One member was supporting one company. It was in their district, etc. But Foxconn was a Tel Aviv-based company. It had American connections too in offices, etc. But it was originally from Tel Aviv in Israel. So Bill Thomas did not want to get in between the two members of Congress. As he went out as chairman and I came in as chairman of the House Administration, he let the contract sit. When I got in there, Bill Livingood, our Sergeant of Arms, who did such a wonderful job, and I had jurisdiction over the Capitol Hill Police, we talked. Bill said, I don't like this. It's a bad security aspect of having these repeaters. Will you hold off on this? I said, sure, we'll do that. Well, Jack Abramoff represented Foxconn. Haley Barbour, at that time, who later became governor of Mississippi, represented LGC. Those were two of the lobbyists. So, of course, those companies contacted us, and as Jack Abramoff did and Haley Barbour did, and they wanted, to see if their clients could get the Foxconn contract, is what eventually got it, or the LGC contract. But I put it by the wayside at Bill Livingood's request, because I was serious about the security of the Capitol. Later, when we kept getting complaints from members of Congress, not from Haley Barbour or Jack Abramoff, but members of Congress would come up to me and say, Bob, I can't use my cell phone, I want to use my cell phone. So we looked back into it. I called the NSA, National Security Agency. They came to my office. We privately met. I said, tell me, and Bill Livingood was involved in this meeting, tell me what's the bottom line of this, the security aspect. They went ahead and they looked at this, and we went to a SCIF room, which is in the Capitol, and that's a private room. Nothing bounces in, nothing bounces out. And they, I won't reveal the information today because of security of the Capitol, but they said it's okay to do these if we do them this way. Doesn't matter which company does them. The Israeli-based company, which in fact has an American entity, or the LGC, pure American company. Doesn't matter which one. We do it this way, it's involved this way, and that's all I can say about it, then we're okay. So, made a decision to award the contract. Now, what we did with the contract, it went through Jay Egan, the CAO of the House at that time, the administrator of the House. What we did with the contract was had the providers do a survey. Now, the providers were Sprint, Verizon, AT&T or whoever else. There were 5 of them. I can't remember the other 2. And they would sign off. Do you want LGC or do you want Foxconn? So we had that input into it. The majority said they wanted Foxconn. Now there's one little twist in this, though. At one point in time, the word was used, and this is how I met with Foxconn, but the word Jew was used. Now I have many Jewish friends, and in Israel, Israeli will say, I'm a Jew, or she's a Jew, or he's a Jew. You can refer that way. But when you refer and use that word in another way, it's a derogatory way to use that word.
Let me just read what you wrote.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Then you can comment on it. This is a couple paragraphs. You say the gist of the story involves Neil Volz, not as a lobbyist, but as staff director for the House Administration Committee, which you chaired. Haley Barber, the lobbyist for LGC, called Neil. He had an air of, quote, hey, it's Haley, need this one. And what translate that? What do you mean, hey, it's Haley, need this one?
Well, Neil Volz can verify the story because he came to me and he said, it's Haley, need this one. Haley used to be head of the congressional, he was the head of the Republican National Committee. He was, when I came into Congress, he was the money guy, wanted to raise money. You need Haley Barber, you want to get it reelected, you need Haley Barber. And
he's acting as a lobbyist, though, for LGC.
But he's a lobbyist this time, for LGC, who's against Jack Abramoff as a lobbyist for Foxconn.
And then Neil told me that at one point Haley said something to the effect that he was fairly busy and, quote, have Bob call me on this sometime.
That's correct.
Do you normally, the members of Congress normally pick up the phone and call a lobbyist on something like this?
Well, you can. I mean, it's happened. It probably happens today. I've done it. But Neil's point at that time, it was pretty flippant. Hey, I'm a little busy. Have Bob call me.
Okay, let me finish this. However, the real problem stemmed from something LGC's lobbyist said, not only to us, but also to the others involved. He referred to Foxconn as, quote, the Jews, and could not understand why I would want to give a contract to a foreign, quote, Jew company. Now, you don't say this, but are you talking about Haley Barber saying that?
Yes.
Because you say an LGC lobbyist instead of Haley Barber. So he said that, referring to it as a Jew company.
And Neil Volz directly brought that to me, and anybody wants to call Neil and verify that, but that's what happened. But it transcended from there, because I believe Jack seized this, Jack Abramoff, to get Foxconn before me, which the government said, well, you met with Foxconn. Well, yes, I did, and I'll tell you why. But it was because of the Jewish issue, not the contract. This got around. Now, whether Jack picked it up or whatever, Jack came into me personally, and I remember what he said. He said, listen, this isn't about the contract. This isn't about money. This is about your reputation with the Jewish community. It's being told that this word's been said to you and you maybe are anti-Jewish. I said, well, that's ridiculous. I support the Israelis. He said, I know, we got to clear this up. Not about money. He brings Foxconn officials in. They sit there. He says, no, we want to clear this up about Bob, because AIPAC was supposedly mad, et cetera, and this was getting around town. And at that point in time, I said, listen, I don't know if you're going to get this contract or not, but as far as not getting the contract because you are an Israeli company, that is absolutely absurd. And so Jack said, that's my point. Now, knowing Jack Abramoff, and as Neil Volz said, he could talk a dog off a meat truck, and Jack was a chameleon of type. He could be who you thought he would be. Possibly Jack Abramoff found out about this and seized it to get Foxconn before me. That's possible. I'm not saying it's not. But so the government, when they said to our attorneys, he sat with Foxconn. Yes, I sat with Foxconn because of that issue, that the slur became part of my political problem.
And who got the contract?
Foxconn got the contract.
By the way, what kind of rights do you have now when it comes to Congress? Can you go on the House floor?
Yes, I can go on the House floor. I have full privileges of the House. I can take people on the House floor. Speaker Pelosi, I would call her office. In fact, I don't think I put it in the book. The only problem I had was Boehner's office. It took him 10 days. His personal attorney called me. John Boehner's Speaker's attorney called me, wanted to know if I was trading a job to bring some former constituents on the floor. So that's the only. But otherwise, yes, I have privileges of the House.
Have you been back over there?
Yes, I was there actually this morning.
And how did they treat you?
Oh, I've been treated well. The first time that I got out of prison in 2008, I was working for Ellen Ratner, and she wanted to go over to the House dining room with some reporters for dinner. So I called, and I said, but I'm not going to go to the dining room, Ellen. She said, oh, you need to come over. I said, I can't. I haven't been back in the Capitol. I had a lot of shame. And I had a lot of friends over in the Capitol, but you know, it's not good for me. I didn't feel. So she said, just walk over. And as I walked in, I had my former member's card. It has my picture on it when I was a member. And I remember, I'll never forget this, the police officer standing there. I go to pull the card out, and he says, "Welcome back, Mr. Chairman. That card's not needed here." And I walked into the House dining room, and a couple of the ladies started crying. And I saw some members, and we said hello, Democrat and Republican, and I was like, wow. Better than I deserve, Brian. Better than I deserve. It was an aha moment for me, and I went back to the Capitol. That was in 2008.
Do you get a pension?
Yes, I get a pension. In fact, I took the pension early because, you know, all my money was gone, so I took an early pension.
How much did your legal fees cost you?
$518,000.
Are they
approximate?
Paid?
Yeah. Well, part of it's paid, part of it's not paid.
How did you raise the money for that?
That was a legal defense fund. I used campaign funds mainly. I would raise legal defense money, but I drained my campaign account, which is, as I refer in the book, caused me to go before John Boehner to ask him for money. When I went Barry Jackson, Karl Rove's #1 guy was sitting there in a room, which was, to me, very unusual. But I was trying to get money to get through the election to win it. I ran out of money, basically, won the primary, and then was headed into zero balance practically into the election.
Here is Jack Abramoff talking about you at, I think it's the National Press Club.
One of the reasons Bob was the only one who went to prison, Bob apparently had a different issue that wasn't related to mine. He took $50,000 in casino chips from an Iranian businessman, apparently, who wanted the government to give permission to sell planes to Iran. Now that act, in doing it in a casino in London, is what I think unhinged Bob. And Bob pled, by the way. If Bob had fought, I'm not sure where it would have wound up. Probably he would have been convicted. But in terms of the stuff with me, nobody else was indicted because a lot of the congressional action is protected under the speech and debate clause.
You write in your book, just before you answer that, I am skeptical today as to whether Jack Abramoff has learned his lesson or if he is back, in quotes, and after the mighty dollar rather than redemption. So where are you? Have you seen him since you both?
I have not seen him. I sent him a little note on Facebook. He sent me one back, sort of a God bless you. You know.
What do you think he said? I mean, this whole story about London and the chips.
Well, this is interesting. This is the first time I've seen this. So if I read my quote now, I'm not sure. Now after seeing this, I am sure that Jack Abramoff just doesn't want to be too frank about what really happened. I'm sure of that from looking at that. So what really happened? Well, first of all, when Jack says, "Well, you know, it was the problem of the chips," I was not indicted for the chips. The government did not indict me. Second, it was not an Iranian businessman. He was a Syrian businessman. And the other thing is that the government had this story about, I asked Colin Powell to try to sell airplane parts. Anyone is free to call Colin Powell. That conversation simply never happened. I never asked Colin Powell if he would help and we would sell airplane parts to Iran. So when Jack says, well, you know, they got Bob because of casino chips, I did have a problem of declaring all the chips. I declared some and didn't declare others, and I put that in the book. But the government didn't indict me on that. What Jack Abramoff is saying there is, well, you know, if the I know what he's saying. If Bob hadn't had that problem in the casino, no, I'm not saying that helped. But if he hadn't had that problem in the casino, there was nothing Bob and I did they would have convicted him for. That's why nobody else was convicted. That's not accurate. I had a stream of favors for Jack Abramoff. I took free food for Jack Abramoff that should have been reported. I took free alcohol from Jack Abramoff that should have been reported. I pled guilty to falsification of a federal document, which was actually a congressional document, which I could have shielded with speech and debate. Jack doesn't like to answer the very question that he has created now in controversy. On 60 Minutes, Jack Abramoff said, I had 100 members in my pocket and I spent $1 million. If Jack Abramoff spent $1 million on 100 members and he spent, say, $30,000 on me, what was the difference between those members and myself? Now, I'm not saying I could point the finger and say this member should be indicted or not. But there were other people that took trips with Jack Abramoff, other people that signed letters for Jack Abramoff, other people that inserted items in the congressional record for Jack Abramoff. I argue Jack Abramoff is not correct that he and I really didn't do anything. It was the London problem Bob Ney had. I argue it was he and I. The London didn't help me for leverage by the government, but it was he and I. And I argue the rest of it is only known to Jack Abramoff. And I write in my book, I think once I went away, Congress, the bad guys were in prison. They didn't have to go after anybody else. When John McCain had his Senate hearing on Indian affairs and drug Jack Abramoff there, Ralph Reed, former head of the Christian Coalition, was involved in a secret plot, received money, maybe millions of dollars, to act like he wanted to close a casino. Jack was to open it. That was the Tigwa tribe, which I said to them, Jack's a good guy. I was culpable in that terrible thing doing it to the Native Americans. When John McCain had his hearing, he didn't drag Ralph Reed there. He only dragged Jack Abramoff. When John McCain had his hearing, the only name mentioned was me. I did wrong things. I committed criminal acts. But when Jack Abramoff says, oh, it was just, well, even Bob wouldn't have been found guilty if it wasn't for London, that is not an admission of reality.
Let me read what you said at the end of when you're talking about the press and Abramoff. Now, you said earlier, you corrected that he didn't want to buy the roll call on the Capitol Hill, which is owned by The Economist. He wanted to buy the Hill.
I made a mistake in the book.
But he did want to buy that, and you talked about John Bresnahan, and then you say Jack knew, meaning Jack Abramoff, knew that once I went away, his friends like DeLay and others would be spared. DeLay's legal woes are in the state of Texas and had nothing to do with Abramoff. The Justice Department totally dropped it. Should Tom DeLay have been indicted by the federal government?
I can't answer that because I'm not Alberto Gonzales and I'm not Jack Abramoff. But I will tell you this: if I was indicted for going on if I pled because I went on a trip to Scotland and Tom went on a trip to Scotland and Tom went to Mariana Islands with Jack, I didn't. The question is that an illegal trip in itself? I don't know. The closeness to Jack Abramoff, Jack did Tom's daughters paid for the bridal shower, or the baby shower. Tom's former chief of staff received a filtered through $1 million from Jack Abramoff into some type of foundation or some such thing that Ed Buckham received. Now, are those all indictable? I don't know. I'm not Alberto Gonzales, but my point is that if a jury in Texas, in a state, in fact, convicted Tom DeLay, what happened here with the Justice Department? If these are peanut things, as Jack Abramoff comes to a conclusion, then, well, these, they really couldn't indict Bob, then I guess either we were all indictable or we all weren't.
Let me show you the picture of you standing over on St. Andrews Golf Course, I believe it is, with the group. And look at this picture. First of all, you are how heavy there?
Well, when I went into prison, I was 234 pounds. I ballooned completely up. I was probably a good 212 there.
And what are you now?
About, let's see, I'll tell the truth. I was 168 when I came back from India last time, about 173.
And who's in that picture? The fellow in the back, Safavian?
David Safavian, who spent, I think, or is still in prison maybe a year. Ralph Reed, Jack Abramoff, myself, and some guy that, I don't know, Jack hired. I don't know who that guy is.
You suggested, though, in your book that Ralph Reed was on the airplane with you, and it was a 8-passenger private jet. Who flew you over there to Scotland?
Jack Abramoff.
He paid for that?
He didn't fly the plane.
And what year was this?
2002?
We also have a picture of you, a whole group of you standing in front of planes. And has this been cleaned up here in this town? Can a member remember this picture? Yes. I think that's Jack Abramoff's son there in the front.
I think probably if you do a fundraiser, you might be able to do. This part of it might have been cleaned up, most likely.
How available were planes to you when you were chairman of the administration committee?
One point I want to make about this trip: the trip was underreported. The trip did not turn out as we had listed it would. Didn't meet with people that we were supposed to. That should have wrote a check for the trip. Tom Feeney from Florida got in trouble over the same trip. He wrote a check, and he didn't go to prison. So maybe if I'd have wrote a check, I wouldn't have went to prison. I don't know. I can't really compare myself to other members. And why did the government not let? Why couldn't I write a check? I don't know all that because I'm not in the mind of Alberto Gonzales that that had the jurisdiction over this. But as far as this trip, we didn't even know, particularly, it was still fuzzy, who paid for it. The point I make in the book, as chairman of the House Administration Committee, as a chairman, I could call up the State Department and say, fire up the jets. I want to go to Scotland. I want to meet with so-and-so, so-and-so. And by the way, I'm going to stay 3 days under the congressional law at that time, and I'm going to golf. I could do that. So my one argument about this trip that I would make is this. At no point in time, and Jack Abramoff knows this, and the Justice Department knew it, and everybody else under the sun, at no point in time did I say, Jack, I want to go to Scotland. Take me to Scotland. At no point in time. At no point in time did I say, why don't you have the Indian tribes pay for it? When I say Jack Abramoff duped me, I'm referring to one thing. When Jack Abramoff told the Indian tribes, Ney wants to take a trip and you guys pay for it, I didn't have to do that. I could call up the State Department and go to Scotland and golf for 3 straight days in a row. I wasn't even a golfer. So that part of it, I have issues with Jack Abramoff over. I did not ask him to get the Indian tribes to pay for that trip. I didn't need that to happen. So that's where I use the part about duping.
I want to be careful how I say this, but when I read your book, and you go into so much more detail than we've been able to cover here in this, I thought maybe a shower might be useful. Not thinking about you, but thinking about this town. Mm-hmm. How much of this goes on to this day? I mean, the more than anything that we haven't talked about are all the staff abusing their privileges behind the scene.
Jack Abramoff and I would agree on one thing if he was sitting here today, and to clean this town up. Everything we did is on steroids now. Everything Jack and I did. Maybe the trips are stopped, but everything's on steroids. They can do all kinds of things up here. The power games, the money games. You want to be a committee chairman. Everybody on that hill knows what I say is true. You have to raise $150,000. You have to raise $500,000. You want to be a chairman, you have to raise that money. You have to play that game to be part of the system. The leaders are making incredible amounts of money, and they control a lot of the power through it. The big pharmaceutical companies, etc., they don't have to go to individual members. Go to some of the leaders. Now, at the end of the day, on this shiny, bright Capitol Hill are some of the most wonderful people in this country, Democrat and Republican. But also, this is corrupt. A lot of good people, some bad people. Mainly good, I argue, but the system is broken. The barrel is corrupt.
Let me ask it a different way. If you were teaching a high school or college course, would you teach an academic's view of how a bill becomes law, or would you have them read this?
I would tell the academic process, I would have them read this, and I would tell them the truth of the reality of how some of the bills become a law. It's a mixture out there. If you take away the money game, and again, I would agree with Abramoff and things I've heard him say, if you want to serve in Congress, you don't become a lobbyist, period. If you're a staffer, you don't become a lobbyist. This is not the feeding ground for the lobby circuit. Take that out of it. Take the money out of the system if you can. Truly take it out. Don't buy chairmanships of committees. Don't have that nuclear campaign arms race of raising money. Look, today, people take their staffers, federally paid, they take them to the Democrat war room, I call it, they take them to the Republican war room across from the Capitol, and they raise money on federal time. Is it illegal? No. Is it right? No.
Sit in the Republican National Committee and the Democratic National Committee and make phone calls.
Absolutely. I did it. It's done today. It's doing it as we speak. I can safely say somebody's doing it. Let's take that side of it out. There's a lot of changes that today Speaker Boehner and Minority Leader Pelosi could join hands today and within 24 hours have such a dynamic change on that hill and allow these good people that are up there, Democrats and Republicans, to function.
We haven't got any time left, but when was the last time you had a drink?
September the 13th, 2006.
AA every day?
About 4 times a week.
And I assume when you're talking about...
12-step recovery, I'm sorry. It's 12-step recovery, traditions of AA.
And you may not want to answer this. I assume when you refer to Old Bill in here, you're talking about Bill Wilson.
No, I'm talking about my friend in Ohio. We call him Old Bill and his wife, Judy.
I thought you were talking about the founder of AA.
No, we call him Old Bill. But I do 12-step recovery because the traditions of AA, we don't talk about AA. I'm very respectful of it. I do 12-step recovery.
The name of the book is Sideswiped. Lessons learned courtesy of the hitman of Capitol Hill. Our guest has been Robert W. Ney, former congressman from Ohio. We thank you very much.
Thank you.
For a DVD copy of this program, call 1-877-662-7726. For free transcripts or to give us your comments about this program, visit us at Q&A.org. Q&A programs are also available as C-SPAN podcasts.